Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second Outlaw webinar. We're ready to start in just a moment. The show is recording, so for those of you who've asked about being able to watch it later on, you will be able to watch it later on. Yeah, I can see some of you have found the chat box. Please feel free to use this to send me questions. I did ask for questions in advance, but there hasn't been much of a response to that, but that doesn't mean you can't ask them this evening. So please feel free to fire away with the questions. I will be pausing at certain intervals during the presentation to enable you to ask me the questions and to enable me to answer them, so I don't have to answer them all at the end. Okay, so Deborah, hello Deborah Brandt, Matthew Savoury. Anybody else wants to send me a little hello on the chat box, please feel free to do that, just so I know you're all here. Hello Andrew Powell, hello Julie Hibbard, yeah. If you send me an email, simon@thetriathloncoach.com, I will send you a link to the first one. Hello, Gary Patterson, Richard Rawcliffe, Duncan Short, Carl Wright, Steve Hinchcliffe, Gary Farnes, Ashley Williams, Paula, Rob Utton, Bethany Smith. Bethany's my co-host tonight. She's going to be looking at the questions. Also, if you have questions after the meeting, you can see Beth's email in there, beth@thetriathloncoach.com, please. Send them a hello, Andrew Leaks, Kevin Brearley, Jason Ennis, Susan Brown, Sarah Foster, Helen Latham Bowl, Nick Clark, Nicola Clues, Dave Miller, Mark Draycott, Carl Andrews, Jill Condon, Martin Hawke, Sarah Foster, Josh Sainsbury Bow, and Susan Brown, and Rosie Helps. All right, so we're going to get going. So for those of you who weren't on the first call, as one of our earlier questioners asked, how do I watch the first webinar? The first webinar is available with a Dropbox link, so you just need to email me. Beth will write my email in, or you can write to beth@thetriathloncoach.com, and she will she'll send that across to you. The first webinar really laid out the structure that you needed to have to get you through your winter-based plans. And some of you who are doing later races, the Outlaw Full perhaps, or anything towards the end of the year, will still be in your winter-based plan. Those of you who are doing Outlaw Half in Nottingham, or not Outlaw X, the one in the south, and Holcombe, can't remember what the one in the south is called, but you know, Bowood, I think it is, Bowood. Those ones are coming earlier on in the summer, so you'll be getting into your specific conditioning, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. So let's get going. I'm going to move away from here now. You'll be able to see my screen, and I'm going to be speaking from these probably every third, probably about a third of the way through. I will come back to here and answer any questions that we've got. On the Q&A, I can see that there's a couple. Joe McNaughton Smith, is it possible to get a copy of the first seminar, please? And also Joe says hello. So yeah, there's also a Q&A place where you can put them. So you can put your questions in the chat box, or you can put your questions in the little box that's titled Q&A. So let me jump on. Oh, one more thing before I get started. I will be following up with an email, and in that email there will be a Dropbox link for you to go and watch the video. Okay, please, when you get the emails, please read them clearly. All the instructions are in there. There will be links to any training plans you wish to purchase, any of the videos I talk about tonight on YouTube, specifically for the dryland swimming drills, which I know a lot of you will probably want to get involved with. There'll be a link in there for both webinars as well, and obviously then we will also have your details for the third webinar, which will be coming up in March. So let's crack on with the webinar. Try not to keep you on here much past 8 o'clock, but if you've got lots of questions, then I'll make no excuse for answering those before you go to bed. Well, before you finish. So let's get going. I'm sharing now with you. Here we go. All right, so training for Outlaw Triathlon with me. That's me, Simon Ward of thetriathloncoach.com. So we're on the specific conditioning phase now. So there are 4 phases, regardless of the distance of the event you've got, although they will happen at different times depending on the event you're doing, because obviously they are staged throughout the year. So we have done the first webinar, which was in December. That was the general conditioning one. As some people have already asked, you can have the link for that. We're now going on to the second webinar, which is specific conditioning. There will be a third webinar in March, which will talk about training that will take you up to race day. And then there will be a final webinar in early May, which will talk about peaking and tapering and race day strategies. So for those of you who might have questions tonight, I don't know why I've got those on. I'm not going to speak on my phone. Let's just get rid of that. Okay. For those of you who are racing in early May, that's going to be relevant. For those of you who are going to be racing in June, July, or later on in the year, then you will want to come and watch these videos and then have the videos available for you to watch at a later date. Right? If you've got questions about what do I do on race day, what temperature is it going to be, I don't know. And if you want to know about race day nutrition, it's important, but it's not relevant right at this very moment, other than to say you need to have some idea of what you're using. Okay, but we'll come to all that in a moment. So today we're on webinar 2 and we're doing specific conditioning. These are some of the things that I talked about in the previous webinars. Okay, so I just wanted to recap on them. So the 4 key points that you need to keep in mind. You need to have a plan. You should have a training plan for this event. You should have a training plan for all events. Now, you could have written that training plan yourself. And if you've been doing this for a while, or you're an avid reader of the magazines and you can sort of cut through all of the various different methodologies there and focus on one. If you're a sports scientist, if you're a coach yourself, then that's great. You can write a plan. Or you can employ a coach. So that's what I do. And I write programs specifically for people. Or there's a sort of place somewhere in the middle of there where you get a program that's written by a coach like me, which lays out a generalized training plan that will take you up to race day. Now, I'll talk about the training plans that we do at the end, but what I'd like you to keep in mind is that having a plan is important. And when you have a plan, then you should stick to it, both with your training and your racing. So it's also important to have a plan for race day. I'll say that'll come in a later webinar. And there is a phrase that coaches are fond of using and the military are fond of using, is that you fail to plan and then you plan to fail. So definitely don't want to plan to fail. You need to be committed. Now, some of you might be looking at it and thinking, well, I'm not a professional triathlete, and that's fine. I understand that you've got lots and lots of other things that are occupying your mind. A lot of you are probably working from home and homeschooling at the moment. You're probably worrying, some of you are probably worrying about relatives and what have you that might be vulnerable. You might have vulnerable children. You've got your own family's stresses and mental health to think of, as well as your own and your work. And then you've got training for the outdoor events. But if you're going to do this thing, be committed to it. If you can only do 6 hours of training a week, and that's by no means a small amount, it's way and above of what the World Health Organization outlines is you know, what's right for people to keep healthy. Way above that. In triathletes, mine 6 hours is not a lot, but let's not say I'm only doing 6 hours. But if you have 6 hours to train a week, so you can train 6 days a week and you can do an hour on each of those, then commit to doing those 6 hours a week. If you've got double that, then commit to doing 12 hours. Don't just be like, oh, well, if I feel like it, I'll do it, right? You've entered this race. Now, whether it goes ahead or not is in the lap of the gods at the moment. So we ought to consider that it's going to go ahead and behave as if it's going to go ahead and commit as if it's going to go ahead. But have in the back of our mind that it might not go ahead. But we definitely don't want to be preparing as if it won't go ahead, because if it does, then you'll be up the creek without a paddle. So the key thing, and you'll see this with over and over again, it comes up in a lot of the coaching programs I do, in a lot of the presentations, in it's not just something that's unique to me. Consistency is the real key to success. You have to commit, and you have to commit to consistency. I'll come on to that in a little bit about how much training's right for you, but be consistent with what you do. If you think 6 hours a week isn't a great deal, but that is what you can manage, then be consistent with 6 hours a week. You'll get far more progress and far more success and achievement out of that than you will with doing hero weeks of 20 hours and then nothing for 2 weeks. So you need to do the right training regularly, and that's maybe where a coach can come in. You also need to be very organized. You need to be good with your time management. You need to have time to train. You need to have time to recover. And that last bit's very important. I'll come back to that again. It's a key part of consistency. I also want you to remind you that you ought to have a backup plan just in case. So for instance, we weren't able to swim for a few months last year. Then we were able to swim. Then we weren't able to swim in November. Then we were able to swim. And now we're not able to swim again. Right? What's your backup plan now that the pools are closed? What's your backup plan if they change the lockdown rules again and say, actually, you're not allowed to go more than 3 miles from your house and you have to cycle indoors, or you have to run indoors, or you can only go out for an hour a day? What's your plan then? Okay, you need to have a race strategy. I'll park that and we'll come back to it at a later webinar. It's important to know your strengths and weaknesses. If you're not a particularly good swimmer, one of your priorities should be to make sure that you can complete the distance in a wetsuit in the time allocated. All right, it's around 2 hours something for outlaw events, and they're a little bit more generous than some other outlaw distance races in giving you time to get through transition and onto your bike, as long as you don't want to stop and have a full English breakfast, a shower and get your hair done. But still, if you think that you're going to be right up against the bumper there on the cutoff for swimming, then do the swimming. Don't just think, well, I'll be able to get through it, you know, with a wetsuit and with all those other people. Make sure. Likewise with the bike, if that's your weakness, make sure that you can do what is required to get through the bike section before the cutoff. You need to have clear goals. You need to have clear goals based on, and I've put a question mark there, because what are they based on? If you've never done a distance like this before in your life, then taking the time that you did for a standard distance race, doubling it up, adding 10%, you might as well use the Duckworth-Lewis method. So a phrase I'm prone to use quite a lot because it makes me giggle, but it's about as useful as using the Duckworth-Lewis method to predict your race time. Or you might as well take an average of your 10 best friends, divide it by 10, and then add on a little bit, and that might be your goal. You see what I mean? So have a goal based on what's realistic for you, the cut-offs, your strengths and weaknesses, the amount of time you have to train, what else you've got going on in your life. And of course, the final thing there, have a training plan based on your goals and knowledge of the course. Outlaw Half in Nottingham, the first one of the half events, is a flat course, so therefore it's a little faster. Holcombe in Norfolk isn't at all like what you expect of Norfolk. It's actually quite lumpy. I'm not going to say that there are big hills like you might get in Yorkshire or the Peak District. There aren't, but there are enough hills to make it a more challenging bike course. When you do Outlaw X, that's a similar course to Outlaw Half. Bowood Hall, I haven't been there, but because of where it is, I would say that it's probably more likely to be undulating than it is to be flat. And the Outlaw Fall is flat, okay? But you need to know that so you can plan your training and plan your goals. Now, some of the biggest challenges you're going to face. Time management, I've been to that one. How are you going to fit it all in? It's no good looking at what your friends do and think, well, I'm going to do that. It doesn't work like that. You've got 168 hours in a week. You need to probably allocate a third of that time to sleeping. And if you're cutting back on sleep to fit in training, that's a big mistake. So you need to think about how much time you need to allocate to work. At the moment, you probably don't have to do any commuting, but you've probably got to do still work from home, and you've got to do some homeschooling, and you've probably got all those other chores to do, and you've got to spend time with your family outside of homeschooling, etc. So think about how much time you can realistically allocate to training and to recovery, because there's a tipping point. The more time we all have a limited amount of time for training, and if we do more of it, we're taking away from somewhere else, and generally we're taking away from recovery time. And so there's a tipping point at which you do too much training and not enough recovery, and basically you're working for nothing then, okay? Because you won't recover and you won't benefit from all of that training. Work-life balance is important. Okay, stay motivated. Really easy at the moment. You know, the weather's pretty grim, isn't it? I can hear it on the roof now. It's been raining just about all day here, and probably for the last 2 days. It's not very pleasant. You know, most people aren't wanting to go out on the bike when the weather's gloomy, it's cold, it's wet. So you go indoors, but who's motivated to do the training we need to indoors? Only a few special people. The current situation probably dims your motivation. You feel a bit tired. You might be having a drink or two more than you normally do, so you're sleeping a bit longer, and etc., etc., etc. So motivation is a real big thing. So think about why you're doing this race, because the reason why you choose to do something is one of the key things about motivation. Training, obviously your biggest challenge is getting the training in, being consistent. Avoiding injury. I would say that the majority of triathletes get injured at some point. Most of them are overuse injuries, and a lot of them are related to running. And if you've got an injury already, then you need to get rid of that. So that's a challenge, because particularly if it's a running injury, when you have a running injury, generally you can't do any running. So you have to get rid of that injury before you can do the running. So then you have to make sure you go and see a physio. Okay. And swimming. Of course, swimming is a big challenge for everybody right now, myself included, because we can't go swimming. All right. I know that there are some people who are doing some open water swimming at the moment, and I'm going to cover that in just a second. So those are the things you should be keeping in mind from the previous webinars. Now let's move on. This is something that I talked about before. This is the Wardy hierarchy of training needs, right? Thank you to Beth, who did this lovely 3D pyramid for me. Look at the things at the bottom here that are really important. The foundations. Having a physio assessment to understand your physiological strengths and weaknesses. You might notice that I've got a wonky shoulder, look, broken collarbone. So this area gets tight. Because this side gets tight and cross-patterning within the body, it sometimes means that my left glute and my left hamstring gets a bit tight, and then that affects my left knee. Okay? Now it's manageable, but I have to stay on top of things. I know all of this because I've had a physio assessment, and I go regularly to sort of for a tune-up. It's important to get your nutrition right. A lot of people only think about nutrition when everything else stops working. A lot of people only think about nutrition when they think they need to lose weight. Nutrition is what keeps us moving as human beings, right? And what's most important is that you're a healthy, efficiently performing human being before you're a performing athlete. Also, mobility and strength. By mobility, I mean stretching with a little bit of movement. So let me show you what I mean by mobility, right? So this is a tricep stretch. Or actually, this stretch here, I'm taking my left leg and I'm crossing it over my right. And now all my weight is on my left leg. And now you can see that is a mobility exercise because I can introduce some twisting there. I can just push across that way with my hip a little bit. I can reach across to the left and get some stretching here. And if I rotate, there's a little bit of torso work in there as well. Okay. And then I can do the same on the other side. Now this is a good IT band stretch. So that's a bit of mobility and you just need to move very slowly. Okay. If I was just going to do a static stretch, I'm holding the stretch there. That's not quite as effective. So these are the things that you need to do first. Everything's in the orange at the bottom of that diagram. Then it comes to adding some specific training. So that's what we're talking about now. But the training only really works to its optimal if all the other stuff underneath it are optimal. A bit like a building, right? And so those of you who were here at the previous webinar will have heard me talk about how a big building will only stay up for a long time if the foundation is solid. So you need to build a solid foundation. Once you've done that, then add technical skills to enhance your swim, bike and run training. And then get busy with consistent training over many months, okay? So that's all the stuff from the blue line there where it says hard work. And when I talk about hard work, I don't mean doing high intensity intervals. Yes, those are hard, but it's equally hard to go out and run when it's pouring down with rain, just for an easy run. It's equally hard to spend 20 minutes a day doing some mobility work. It's hard to go to bed early when you'd rather stay up and watch something on Netflix. Okay, it's hard to get up early. It's hard to keep a routine. It's hard to prepare a meal from scratch using vegetables rather than ring for a takeaway. That's hard work as well. So please don't think the hard work is just related to those 2 or 3 interval sessions every week. The stuff above, you see there, it says power meter, GPS, smartwatch like a Garmin or this Sunto I'm wearing. Those will add a bit of precision. They collect data. Will they help you be faster? Well, arguably they will if you use the data that they give you, but if you never look at it, then you might as well do without that. Same with this little sleep tracker that I wear. It doesn't really do anything while it's sitting on my watch other than collect data, but unless I look at the data, I might as well discard it. Okay, having a VO2 max test or an FTP test or a lab test. Are they useful? Yes. Will they help you go faster? Possibly, but only if you're doing all the other stuff first. And then when you want to go onto the Outlaw, unofficial Outlaw Facebook page or onto that other Outlaw, is it called the Outlaw Journey or something on Facebook, and ask whether you should be having carbon wheels or Vaporfly shoes or aero bars, you know, that's the little icing on the cake. And all of that was taken, oh, actually, it wasn't. I'll show you that in a minute. So here are the things that you need to do to set yourself up for a good race day performance. Okay, none of this is related to training. You need to focus on sleep, quantity and quality. You need to get at least 7 or 8 hours every night. If I did a poll now and asked how many people get, and when I say 7 or 8 hours sleep, if you go to bed at 10 and you get up at 6, that means you've got the opportunity for 8 hours sleep. But I've yet to meet anybody that sleeps for 8 hours solid when they're in bed for 8 hours. Normally, they'll be awake, they'll turn over, they'll get up to go to the bathroom, they'll wake up briefly at the end of a sort of a spell of dreamy sleep or deep sleep. They might be sort of dozing towards the sort of end of the night. So most people won't get 8 hours sleep if they're in bed for 8 hours. It's more likely they're going to get 7 if you're not even in bed for 7 hours, you need to start thinking about how you can improve if you can. I appreciate that some people have schedules, they're working shifts, they're working late. If you're working in the NHS and you're having to work extra hours, I feel for you. I don't have a solution for that other than, you know, think about your recovery and your rest first rather than your training. Sleep needs to be consistent. So by consistent, I mean going to bed and getting up at the same time every day, if you can. Again, if you work in shifts, it's more difficult. But if you can get into bed at the same time every night and wake up at the same time every night and try not to catch up on the weekends, that is by far the most effective way to get good sleep, because you get into the right circadian rhythm. And in order to make your sleep most effective, you need to have a good pre and post sleep routines. You need to be doing the strength. Strength training is great. It helps prevent injury. It helps you to, you know, if you've got a wonky shoulder and when you're doing that swim drill here and you're in that position, if your shoulder drops or your arm goes straight because this is weak here, if you're unable to hold your arm up there, if you're unable to hold your elbow up and it just drops in, that's often structural weakness, which can be improved by some very deliberate, specific strength training. But before you do that, you need to build mobility. And the general ratio for mobility training is 15 minutes for every 60 minutes of training you do. I'll come back to this in a minute. Some other stuff, stress management. Okay, the more balanced and harmonious your life, the easier it will be to recover. If your life's full of stress and tension and angst, that will probably affect all sorts of other things. Your blood sugar will be up and down, so will your insulin. Your sleep patterns will be disturbed. So trying to find balance and harmony, trying to get on top of your time management. Meditation is really good for this. Other things that relax. There's a lot of debate about whether massage is useful for recovery, but if you're relaxed and it reduces your heart rate variability, then it probably is a good thing. On its own, for muscle tissue, it's debatable. But if you believe it works, then that's probably a good thing. Right, and finally, nutrition. So daily nutrition is far more important than race day nutrition. Now, I don't mean to marginalize race day nutrition. It is important, but given that you've got 5 months until Outlaw Half, and so let's say that's 150 days. So that's 150 days of nutrition between now and race day, and one race day. So what's going to have the most impact on your performance? It doesn't need to be difficult. Okay, there's some very, very simple rules. Eat real food. So if it comes out of a tin, if it comes out of a box, if you phone up somebody to have it delivered, as in a shop or a takeaway, if it has to be heated up in the microwave or in the oven and it's already pre-made, that's probably got additives. So you can try and avoid that. If you can grow it, pick it, catch it, kill it, then that's a good thing. Got on the killing thing, some people might not agree with me there, but the point is it's real food. Okay, so you eat real food. Avoid the fad diets. Now, I'm not saying that keto or low carb, high fat or paleo or vegan or vegetarian, I'm not saying they're useful. I'm not saying that people have philosophies that they shouldn't follow. But what I am saying is they're not a magic bullet to your success. And if you're trying to go, say, keto, while you're also trying to train for a half outlaw or a full outlaw, that's 2 lots of stresses you're putting on your body. That might be too much. So what I'm saying is, for now, focus on the race. Avoid following a fad diet. Eat real food. Eat more protein, between 1.5 to 2 grams per kilo per day, including females. Right? If that's slightly more than recommended, don't worry about it. There's a study by a guy called Paolo Antonio, I think it was. He studied a group of people for over 2 years, looking at them taking 4 grams per kilogram per day, and none of them had any of the mythological things that happen when you eat too much protein, like kidney problems and etc. etc. So there isn't a problem with eating slightly too much. For older athletes, it's good. For older females past the menopause, eating more protein is good. It helps to retain lean muscle mass. It'll help with your recovery. It'll also help with hunger management. If you're going to eat carbs, nothing wrong with carbs. Eat smart carbs. So rather than rice and pasta and the simple stuff, which you might need occasionally, try to go with things like sweet potato and root vegetables, lentils, beans, etc. Definitely try to reduce or cut out refined sugars, reduce or cut out processed foods, and reduce or cut out alcohol. Now, again, if you like a beer in the evening, nothing wrong with that. If you like 4 or 5 beers in an evening, I can guarantee that's going to affect your sleep, it'll affect your recovery, it'll have some impact on your metabolism, on fat distribution. It's not a positive for your race performance. Okay, so if you want some ways in which you can help your recovery, then definitely reduce the alcohol intake and keep on top of hydration. Right, I'm not saying that 8 glasses of water a day is the right thing, but if your pee is clear and consistent and regular, then you're probably in a good state. Okay, right, I'm going to stop sharing now. I can see there's been a few questions there, so let me stop sharing. Let me go on the Q&A. So Duncan Short, right, Duncan says, I'm booked in for Outlaw Full in July. I'm also accompanying my wife at the Stirling Marathon on the 9th of May. Any comments on recovery time and whether this is a good idea? Right, Duncan, so I'm not a great fan of using a marathon in the spring to train for a full distance triathlon performance later on in the year. If you're accompanying your wife, I'm not going to make an assumption about your wife's performance, but what I would say is if she's racing and you're pushing yourself, then you're going to need a longer recovery. And generally, when you're running a marathon, the legs are tired for 2 to 3 weeks afterwards, and that's going to have an impact on your training. You're probably going to have to do light training, so that'll take you through to the end of May. Having said that, you would be doing some longer distance running at that time. So I would see it as a longer distance race. If you're accompanying your wife, is it an out and back course? Is it a big loop? Is it laps? Is there any way you can miss out part of the course and join her and run with her and not take a time? Is there any way you can drop out after 20 miles? I don't know. I would be thinking about the Outlaw primarily rather than a performance with your wife. A lot depends on exactly how intense it's going to be for you. If it's going to be a long time that you're out there, then you also got to think about how, the fatigue on your legs. So George, right, George Mundy, exercise guidance on meals and nutrition in general post-exercise, right, George? I did give you a bit about nutrition there. So what I want you to do is in the chat box, just tell me if I answered your question in what I said about nutrition a moment ago. If not, then I'll come back and do a bit more. Okay, right. Richard Rawcliffe, Hero Weeks, busted. Try and avoid Hero Weeks if you can. Okay, right, so 2 new messages. Oh yeah, post-exercise. Right, George, I'm going to come to that at the end, right, George? Because I might cover it a bit now. It's a bit nuanced, depending on what sort of training you're doing, because the nutrition won't be the same after every training session. So let's go back to the sharing the screen and okay, right. So let's play again and let's move on. So the #1 rule, consistency. If you haven't heard me say it before, in 1989, right, that's 32 years ago, I went to a training camp with a guy called Bernie Shrewsbury, who was British triathlon champion at the time. I had a little book like this I made notes in. I found it recently, and when I opened, this isn't it, but I opened up the inside cover and I'd written a big note on the inside, consistency is the key to success. That message is as powerful now as it was 32 years ago. And in fact, before Bernie said it, he would have got it from somewhere, probably like somebody like Arthur Lydiard or Emil Zatopek, who were a coach in the 60s or an athlete in the 50s, and they would have said consistency is the key to success. It's one of the sort of undeniable tenets of endurance training. Consistency is the key to success. So going back to the volume you can do, it doesn't matter if it's not a huge volume, if you can consistently hit that number. Okay, that will be one of your biggest determinants of race day performance. All right, I talked about hero training. Somebody said they'd been busted. This is a little diagram that I did. So 2 approaches. The blue line denotes the hero training, the hare, if you like. The green line denotes a steady away, sort of like Yorkshire phrase, steady away, lad. Right? So both athletes start off at the same point. Our hero, hare, goes off full tilt, puts in a couple of big weeks. In terms of his fitness level and his chronic training load or his TSS points, he's ahead of the steady away athlete, the tortoise. But then, because he's pushed it a little too hard, his immune system's a bit weak, he gets injured. So he misses a bit, or he gets ill, so he has to miss a bit of training. So his fitness falls back. Meanwhile, the tortoise, steady away, carries on, and now he's ahead. And he's ahead again for a couple of months. But then our hero, hare, is recovered. And so having missed some training, he throws himself at it. He gets in a couple of really big hero months. And by March, he's ahead of the tortoise, the steady away athlete. But guess what? He's overdone it again, and he gets really ill this time, or really injured. And so he has to miss a full month. His fitness falls back, and meanwhile, our steady away tortoise is progressing up. What you can see in the long run, by the time they get to make, is that our steady away tortoise is fitter and has accumulated more training than our hero hare. Now that is just not based on any figures, but I've seen that happen so many times. And if you think about that stretching out over several years, the person who's steady away, doesn't seem to get injured, doesn't do any hero sessions, tends to make the best progress. Make sure that's you. All right, now my hierarchy of needs was borrowed, if you like, from Stephen Seiler. For those of you who haven't listened to Stephen Seiler, I've done a couple of podcasts with him. He's got a Texan drawl, and we talk for 2 hours. And I can talk a lot, as you can tell, but so can Stephen Seiler, and you want to listen when he's talking. He's the guy who coined the term polarized training. And what he says here, if you look at that pyramid, is that those bottom 3 with the red arrows in there, they're the key things where it's well established that these are the foundations that work best. And if that's all you can do, train regularly and work on volume, do a little bit of high intensity training whenever you feel good. And if you have a bit more organization in your training, maybe distribute it so 90% of it is easy and 10% of it's really hard, then you'll get a long way towards your goals. Messing around with things like general periodization, as useful as it is, right, having a more organized training year, messing around with sport specific and micro periodization, which should be left to people like me to do, because that's what I do all the time, rather than you spending hours trying to work it out and then missing your training. Okay, and even I don't do it in that great depth for most clients. Playing around with altitude training or altitude tents, or going to altitude chambers, doing sauna protocols, messing around with your fasted training, or sleeping low or sleeping high, and then doing all of those other things in the pointy end, they will make some difference, but only if you've done all the other stuff first. If you want one solid gold bit of advice that I could give to you now, and if you were paying for this webinar, this would be worth the price of the webinar itself, is just stick to the bottom 3. Train regularly, get the volume in as much as you can with the time you've got. Do some high intensity training when you feel good. You know what it's like when you go out there and you go running and all of a sudden you feel like you're indestructible. Well, go for it on that day. Have a blast. Don't do it all the time. You won't feel like doing it all the time, but on the days you do, just give it some. And if you want to be a bit more precise, then divide it up as 10% of your training high intensity, 90% steady. All right. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about training. I'm just going to, before I go in here, I'm going to, actually, I'll cover the general guidelines first. So when we did the first webinar, I talked about polarized training. So that's what Stephen Seiler does. Generally, it's 80-20. That's sort of 80% of your sessions are fairly easy to moderate. 20% of your sessions are pretty hard. And then we miss that bit out in the middle. That's the 5%. And often that 5% is accidental, you know, running or riding uphill, going into the wind. All right, you don't need to plan to do that, what they call sweet spot stuff. When you do race conditioning, which is the sort of final 6 to 8 weeks, it's definitely pyramidal. So there's definitely more stuff in that sort of sweet spot area for a short period of time. I'm not keen on it all year round, but for a specific period of time when it's race pace stuff, I think it's a great idea. Okay, and you can see there that we do a little bit less of the easy stuff and a little bit less of the really hard stuff, and we put some more stuff in the middle so it becomes more like a pyramid. The bit you're in now, the specific conditioning bit, is a hybrid because you're moving from polarized to pyramidal. So you do about 75%, so a little bit less easy to moderate, still 10% really hard stuff, and about 15% threshold stuff. So you can be a bit more specific there. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, most of your training still MAF or zone 2 or sub-aerobic threshold, whatever you want to call it. If you're doing HIIT intervals, so the really high-end stuff, up to now, they've been around 30 to 60 seconds. Now you're going to stretch them out to 1 to 3 minutes. Previously, I would have recommended just running and riding on the hills if you've got them. Now I would say put in some specific strength sets, and I'll tell you what those are when we get onto the bike and run stuff. I would also recommend that you start to think about including an occasional brick session. So you might do an interval session on the bike and then go out and do a long run. Or you might do a long bike and then just do a 20 to 30 minute run. I don't think you need to do them all the time. I don't think you need to do them every week, but I think you need to get used to it. But please don't be thinking that it's really going to make you perform better if you do lots of brick sessions. It's about getting used to having that wooden leg feel, and sort of it's almost like a mental thing as much as anything. I definitely think you should continue with the daily mobility and twice weekly strength. So it would be a bad idea to up your training volume by reducing those. Okay, let's just go back to see if there's any questions for me to answer. Kevin, right. Kevin Braley, I'm coming on to that now. Is resistance band work a suitable replacement? Nick Clark, I've had an injury which is taking weeks to recover. Do I just rejoin my training plan when I can, or throw the plan away and start again? Right, Nick, would you mind just writing in there what sort of injury it is that you've had, please? Just type it in if you don't mind. I'm going to go on to questions now. Josh Sainsbury Bow, follow on from marathon question, would you using the Outlaw Half Nottingham as a training option for the full? Yes, that's a good idea. You can go full tilt if you want. I would be definitely forgetting about your performance in terms of times for the whole race. I would maybe think about some specific times, like you know, what pace can you do the swim, or if you hammer the bike, can you run at your outlaw pace on the run? You know, maybe use it as an opportunity to practice your transitions. Maybe use it as an opportunity to, if you're nervous about swimming in a group, to swim in a group and get yourself in the thick of it. Maybe an option to work on your nutrition. Richard Rawcliffe, my main concern is swimming. I have a swimming background, but not been in the pool for years, so wondering how long it will take to get back up to the full 2.4 miles easy. Well, Richard, if you've got swimming background, you're probably better placed than anybody, because I would assume that you're a little bit more confident. Please don't be thinking that that gives you a massive advantage if you haven't swum for a year. I would say that you need to swim frequently when you can. and do the occasional long session. So I'd do maybe one interval session and one long session a week, and then swim frequently to get the sort of feel for the water back. Sarah Foster, when I talk about mobility, are you talking about stretching? Yes, but with a little bit of movement, or yoga, Pilates. Yoga maybe, if it's yoga with movement. Pilates, maybe not. Sarah, if you email me or send a message to Beth, so on the chat thing, you can send a message to an individual, send a message to Beth with your email address, and we'll send you a link to Sarah Pitt's mobility program. George Mundy, I live in a very hilly location. Most of my training and riding is running on the hills. That has a lot of undulation, with the Nottingham half course being flat. Is it going to be a problem? No, George, it's not a problem. Again, a lot depends on your goals. You'll be strong. There was some research that Dan Plews, one of my friends, Dr. Dan Plews, did, and he referred to in his long LTD 102 course that he did, that athletes that train on the flat and work on spinning a higher gear at big power tend to ride better. Those who are pushing a big gear going uphill tend to be better on the hills. I shouldn't think it'll be a problem with your finishing. You might want to just do, if you've got a turbo trainer, then use a turbo trainer with some flat courses. You know, if you're using Swift or Trainer Road, find one of those and do some stuff on there. James Hargreaves, in weeks when you need to reduce hours, do you drop the low or high intensity work that week? So if that's a week where it's a recovery week, then you drop the high intensity work. Recovery weeks tend to have similar frequency. So if you train twice a day, continue with that. You might drop the volume by 20–30% and you cut out most of the high intensity work. However, you can do speed work. So speed work would be 20 to 30 second bursts, turning the legs over quickly, but not really a great deal of fatigue produced. All right, that's the questions for the moment. So go back to the chat box. Nick, pulled groin, right, Nick? So I would say, this is Nick Clark, do I just rejoin my training plan when I can? So Nick, if you've got a groin and it's been tight and you're having treatment, that muscle will be weak, and it's a fairly well-known phenomenon within the physio world that the site of your next injury is usually the last one, because that's the weakest spot. So if you suddenly go back into the program having missed a plan, having missed the training, and then go back to where you were, you're going to overload that muscle, and the chances are you're going to end up with another problem, and then that will prolong your treatment, your rehab, and your frustration. So I would start again. Our physios recommend that when people have been injured, that their first run is no more than 10 minutes, with five times 1 minute of running, 1 minute of walking. And then don't do anything for a couple of days and see how the body responds. And if there's no relapse, then you sort of maybe do 10 times 1 minute. Okay, take 2 to 3 weeks to build up to consistent running of 20 to 30 minutes. All right, you'll be frustrated about your race, but remember, healthy humans first, then performing athletes. All right, because if you continue to weaken that groin muscle, those adductor muscles, or those pelvic muscles, you're going to cause yourself a long-term problem, and that means future racing will be difficult. So you have to think about that rather than what you're doing for this race. Jill says, I have an injury too, getting over a badly sprained ankle, still not running, beginner triathlete too, concerned I can't make up the training due to do the knots half. Well, Jill, can you walk? If you can walk, then get out and walk. Take some walking sticks if necessary. Actually help with aerobic fitness, particularly when you're walking uphill. So those Nordic poles, you can get some of those. They'll really build your heart rate up when you're walking uphill. They'll help when you're coming downhill. They'll take a little bit of weight off your ankle. Then get out and do some long walks, okay? Up the biking, so you've got bike fitness. And now the thing I'm going to talk about is doing some swim drills. So let's go back to sharing. Oops, not that one. Let's go back to sharing. So general guidelines. Swimming, right. Still no pools. So what can you do? Mobility. Right. What I see from novice swimmers so i.e. all but the sort of top 10 or 15% of swimmers, is that they create their own drag. They've got a kick that instead of going like that, goes like this. The legs are all over the place. So like every time, if you think of a tight circle that you're swimming through, yeah, nice and tight, and you're going through that tube, you create less drag. If your arms are all over the place and your legs are all over the place, then there's lots of, you have to swim through a bigger tube, and that creates more drag. If you are the sort of person who has tight hip flexors, so if that's your body, so this is your upper body, this is your legs, and if you've got a nice perfect line there, then that's streamlined. If your legs drag, yeah, if your legs are tight in the hip flexors, so here, and you can't get into that position, and you can get into this position because you sit a lot, or you bike a lot, or you run a lot, or you've just got bad posture, then because your legs sink, that's drag. If your ankles, if that's your leg and that's your foot, and you're swimming along with your toes pointing down, that's creating drag as well. So whilst you can't get in the pool, you can work on mobility of the hips, mobility of the ankles. Can you do this? Yeah. Can you get your arms above your head and into a streamlined position, or are you like, do you push off the wall with your arms like this out in front? Again, that's all about drag. So you can get more mobile in the lats. Can you get good rotation? So seated with your feet on the floor and just work the upper back. Put your hands on your knees while you're seated and do this exercise here and mobilize the upper back. Okay, do a child's pose, which is a yoga pose where you kneel on the floor, sit on your heels, reach forward like that, and then put your arm under here and do like an upper back rotation. Okay, so more mobility will at least help you to be more streamlined. And remember, 15 minutes a day for every hour of training you do, which means that if you are going to be training 10 hours a week, that's 2.5 hours of mobility, which is about 20 minutes a day. But you can break it down. You do 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the evening. You can do 2 or 3 minutes throughout the day. It's fairly easy. Just use dead time to do some stuff. Okay, now if pools are closed indefinitely, you need to get some stretch cords. In the email I send out, I will send you a link to stretch cords. Making a note of that now. And my glamorous assistant Beth will make sure that I send this out. Okay, so now I'm going to share with you a little video that I did. So this is on YouTube. So sharing now. Here is my how to use stretch cords video. Here I am then, just setting up, putting my hands into the paddles to begin using my new stretch cords, which we're going to make full use of in this period when we can't get in the pool. So the first thing I want to do here is activate the lats. So we're talking about these small muscles here at the top of the side body, if you like, as my physio Louisa calls it, underneath the armpit. Now, one of the things I think age group has missed. Right. Apparently you can't see the video, so what I'm going to do is I will send you a link to the video. So there's a link to how to use the stretch cords. There's also some strength and some very specific strength work you can do with a Swiss ball to complement that as well. Okay, and some TheraBand work. So I'll send you those when you've got your cords. Definitely don't try to do a full 1 hour. Your shoulders won't take it. The resistance from the bands is quite strong. Okay, you won't be able to get into a position that you're doing equivalent to 300 or 400 meters. So I would suggest it's better to do 40 or 50 movements. So if I was to show you a movement now, you would be in this position here, you need to be bent over at the hips here, and you need to have the fixing point at about shoulder height, and then you'd be doing some work. You'd be doing some high elbow work there, okay? And then you keep this one arm out. I would say you want to be rotating forward as if you were going into the stretch. And so you hold one cable here with the right arm, and then you do this and push out and then come back. And then do the same on the other side. Okay, so you get the high elbow. And you want to get the high elbow without shrugging your shoulders up to your ears. So the shoulders need to be back. So high elbow to there and back. Okay, just go through those movement patterns on a regular basis, maybe every other day, just to remind yourself. What's going to happen is that your feel for the water will be lost, but you'll still have some movement pattern recognition, and that's going to be a big help. But it's not going to replace swimming in open water or in the water. Right, now back to sharing, because I have one more thing I want to say about swimming. I know that some people want to swim in open water. Right now the water's pretty cold. I live right by the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, and right outside my front door, just about 50 yards to my left, is the marina. It was frozen last week. That means the water's flipping cold. Now, as much as I like having a daily cold shower, if I went in there, I'd be able, even if I had a wetsuit on and a hat and gloves, I'd probably be able to spend 10 minutes in there. I'd be flapping around. I'm quite a good swimmer. I like swimming. I like going in open water. I see the value of cold water immersion. But combine those things together. If I was in the water for 10 or 15 minutes, I wouldn't be doing anything that was meaningful to my swim fitness. Okay, apart from getting wet. So personally, unless you're a hardened open water swimmer and you've been doing it for years, I am not recommending that you try to go open water swimming because you can't get in the pool. I just think it'll be doing more harm than good. I know some people who do, and when they've been there, they spend the whole day feeling cold and recovering. And one thing I have learned about the cold is you feel incredibly tired because your body's just upping your metabolism to keep warm. And so then it's going to affect what else you do. Okay. Now, again, there are some benefits for mental health for you to be in cold water, but there's a difference between the mental health benefits and actually meaningful fitness swimming. So for now, I would concentrate on getting your cardiovascular fitness through cycling and running. I would do the swim drills with the bands. I would do the mobility work. And then as soon as you can get back in the pool, I would do that. Okay. Right, the bike. Right, no restrictions on cycling at the moment. I have my own views about how far local is. Right, in fact, local to me is my garage, which is out there. I'm riding my indoor bike at the moment. One, because I don't get wet, I don't get cold. Two, because I can ride for 2 hours and there's far more quality and control than out on the road. And three, because it means I don't have to go out and sort of worry about what the actual rule says about how far I can cycle from my house. Right, so if you can use Zwift, if you can go on your smart trainer and do intervals, it's a far better use of your time. However, some of the things you should be thinking about now, maybe riding once a week, is to start to lengthen your longest ride. So for half outlaw events, a long ride will be 2 to 3 hours. For longer outlaw and outlaw distance races, you probably want to be 4 to 5 hours. But again, be mindful of what I said about the cold weather. Be mindful about the sort of costs versus benefits about being outside for 5 hours riding now when the weather is cold. Okay, I know that they say there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. However, you can just start to get cold if you're out riding for 5 hours. And again, at this moment in time with lockdown, yes, I know you've got a race to do, but is that really sort of ethically being within the rules and playing by the rules that we should all sort of be trying to adhere to clear this virus up as quickly as possible? Again, I don't care whether you've got a race or not. We've got this something bigger hanging over our heads, but that's another discussion. Something else I would do, find bike routes with a similar profile to your chosen races. I would start to ride your TT bike more. So you might be very precious about your TT bike and you don't want to take it outside in bad weather, and that's fine, but you can put it on your indoor trainer and start riding it there, and definitely start getting into the aero position. And one of the most frustrating things I see is people who've got expensive bikes and they've paid to put aero bars on, and then they sit on the hoods, yeah, because the back hurts or the shoulders hurt, right? That's down to bad bike fit and not enough training at staying in that position. So you should invest in a bike fit and try to avoid a bike fit that's all about aerodynamics and making you go faster. Make sure it's a bike fit that's based around how flexible your body is. I saw a guy recently got a bike fit and he was sort of like this and looked like he was struggling to look up. And it may well be the most aerodynamic position he can find, but I can guarantee that after 25 miles, his neck's going to be in so much pain in his back that he isn't going to be able to maximize his running. So find a bike fit for your body type and position, and that you can hold for 56 or 112 miles. Add specific strength sets. So I talked about this earlier. You'd want to start doing, you could change your high intensity intervals a little bit. So instead of pedaling at fast cadence, you pedal at a very low cadence, around 50 to 60 RPM, aiming to hit zone 4, which is around 90 to 92% of your maximal heart rate. Zone 4 power, so probably about 110% of your functional threshold power. You do 5 lots of 60 seconds of that, then ride easy for 5 minutes and then repeat it. And each week add another sort of, then you do two lots of 660 and then 2 lots of 760 and 2 lots of 860. Okay, with your longer hit intervals, I would be stretching these out to from 1 to 3 minutes. Do 90 to 92% max heart rate again, so and around 105 to 110% of functional threshold if you use power. I wouldn't do 2 of those in a week because you'll have some running stuff to do as well. So I'd do maybe a strength set, a high intensity strength set 1 week, high intensity conventional interval the next week, and then have a recovery week and then do that again. Okay, on the run, I would start to lengthen your longest run. Somewhere between an hour and a quarter and an hour and 3/4 at the moment will be fine. The further away your race is, the less requirement there is for you to be doing your long runs now. If you're training for the full Outlaw, or you've got another Outlaw distance race later on in the year, I'd say depending on what you've been doing previously, you'd want to be looking at an hour and a half to 2.5 hours now. I won't be doing them every week. I'd think about doing double run days to accumulate that volume in 2 hits. It would depend on your current physical status, your love of running. You can go and walk and run for 2.5 hours, which will just give you time on your legs. Again, like the bike, find routes with similar profile to your chosen race. Holcomb's got an undulating course. Outlaw X and Outlaw Half have got flat run courses, so is Outlaw Full. Bowood, I think, might be a bit more undulating, but I'm not entirely sure. I think you should start adding specific strength sets. This is running about 0.5 kilometre to 1 kilometre up a gradient, trying to hit your goal race pace. Right, the gradient only needs to be 2 to 3%, so not really a big hill, so you can maintain decent running posture and form. But the gradient at your full or half distance pace will add more intensity. I'd continue to do your short hit reps, 30 to 60 seconds, just for a bit of speed work and a bit of high intensity. Okay, you could include these as one session, or you could include them as part of a longer run. So this is an example of a run session that I would do, where this is about an hour duration, this run, but there's 3 blocks of time there, about 8 minutes, where you do 30 seconds at maybe 5 or 10k pace and have a rest. So you could run out to somewhere, do those intervals, then run on a bit longer, do some more intervals. You don't have to do it as 3 blocks of 8. You could do it as 2 blocks of 5. You could do it as 3 blocks of 5, whatever. It's mostly a long run with a little bit of speed work interspersed. You could equally do those strides at the beginning and then go out and run for a longer distance. So you can do the longer distance run and then do them at the end. But I think it's a good idea to keep some faster running in, so you don't get used to just plodding. But underlying all this is the frequency and consistency are better than occasional big volume. All right. Right, so summary. This is what I said before. It still holds true now. Most plans will work. You need to find a program that works for you, and you need to stick to that plan. Remember what I said right at the beginning. You need to be consistent. You need to get the basics right. So stay away from those Facebook pages and those Instagram feeds of people doing the glamorous stuff. Just get the basics right. If you want to know what makes the great athletes great, it's being good at the basics, right? And when somebody goes on Instagram and Lionel Sanders posts, a video of him doing his 4,400s in the Emil Zatopek way, and you go, yeah, man, he's an animal. Yeah, he is. But it wouldn't be much fun if you just watched a video of Lionel running 20K at a steady pace, would it? But those are the meat and potatoes of what makes him a good athlete. All right. Test regularly. You don't have to do a specific test, like a functional threshold test, or you could do a math test. You could go on the bike and just ride at your math heart rate for an hour and see what wattage you hold. If it's higher than last week, that counts as a test and it counts as proof that you're improving. Don't forget to maximize rest and recovery. Anyone can train. It takes a bit more to do the other stuff, the hard work. And focus on your weaknesses, but don't ignore your strengths. Right, I'm going to come back to this in a second. All right, I'm going to stop sharing now. I'm going to answer your questions. So let's go in here. What have we got? Rachel Rain. I eat veggie and eat well and a fair amount. Having up my exercise since spend a lot of my time hungry and regularly get up in the night to eat. What's the best bet to be less hungry? Right, I'm going to come back to you, Rachel. Oh, well, actually, Rachel, I'll try and answer yours now. Right. If you're hungry, you could try and up your protein. I mean, it's difficult when you're a vegetarian, so you need to think about your protein. It may be you're eating too many vegetables and you need to up your carbohydrates. You definitely shouldn't be waking up in the middle of the night hungry. Maybe you eat too fast, and if you ate slowly, that would satisfy those little hunger monsters that are in your stomach, the ghrelin monsters. But protein has been shown to be good to help with hunger cravings. But I would start to write down what you eat and think about counting the calories just for a bit. I suppose also, are you losing weight? Because if you're losing weight as well, that would be a fair indication you're not eating enough. If people say you're looking skinny, or you look like you've lost a bit of weight, there's times to think that that's a great compliment, and there's times to think that you should be a bit more concerned. I'm a nervous swimmer. This is Nicola Clues, but competent and swam open water a lot last year, but still have some panic issues in the deep water. Are there any online programs that you know of to help me mentally train? Actually, Nicola, specifically to this, I did a podcast. If you go into the chat box and send your question to Beth, we will find the podcast that I did with Lucy Gossage and Lucy's psychologist. They put together a whole series of lessons about this whole thing here, not just open water swimming, but some of the other stuff, because I know Lucy Gossage had a big problem with open water swimming. So I'll find that, and then you can have that one there. But I think Beth is also a life coach, and she helps people to overcome their biggest fears. And one of the biggest things is to just acknowledge, oh, hold on. That question's just gone from there, from Nicola. So yeah, Nicola, oh yeah, right, Nicola, it's just disappeared. Yeah. So yeah, Beth will help you. So I can see you've just spoken to her there. Rob Cummings, is that Rob from LBT? Rob, how much of a difference does a TT bike make over a road bike and aero bars? No, okay, probably not Rob Cummings that I know, but TT bike, yeah, if it's well fitted and you're used to being in the aero position, and Outlaw half probably will make a difference. However, if this is your first race, if you don't know whether you're going to like triathlon or come back and do another one, I would say as long as you can finish the bike section, and that's the most important thing. I mean, for a lot of people, they want to buy a bike that they can use to commute, to do road riding. You know, you can put some clip-ons, but just putting clip-on bars onto a road bike won't necessarily make it a better position. You need to have a bike fit because there's a difference in the geometry of a road bike. However, if you go back to the archives and look at pre-1989, Dave Scott and Mark Allen and all those guys were doing Ironman in Hawaii on road bikes. In fact, I've got a picture of Dave's first road bike that he did Ironman on way back in the early 80s. Amazing. It looks just like any other road bike. Resting heart rate, Duncan, is it a good measure of fitness? Well, it's a good measure of your heart pumping capacity. In short, if your body needs 5 litres of blood a minute and your heart can pump out, let's see, 100 millilitres, it needs to pump 50 times a minute. If it can pump 120 millilitres, then it can pump out more with each beat, and therefore it needs to beat less per minute. So it's a good indication of your pumping capacity generally. Super low heart rates can be a problem because it can indicate too much sympathetic stress, I think, and then it affects the vagal nerve and all of that sort of stuff. So, but if you've got a lower resting heart rate, is one measure. Does it infer good aerobic fitness? Probably not quite as clear cut. But for health, yeah, lower is better. Sarah, I do a regular yoga session. If you have a specific reason for needing to do Pilates, then I would recommend that. But generally, I think for mobility and balance and strength, I'd prefer yoga. But it depends on your teacher and the type of yoga that you do. Yoga is also very good for breathing and for meditation and sort of being zen and all that sort of stuff. So it's more than just stretching. Richard Rawcliffe, trying to get faster as I get older, 57 now. There's some general training tips for older athletes and as I get even older. Well, Richard, I'll be 57 in a month's time, in fact. So I'll be joining you on that number, and I am going through that same battle. And briefly, I would say do less cardio, do more so yeah, reduce the amount of cardio you do. Continue with or introduce high intensity training, lift heavier weights, eat more protein, avoid hero sessions. So you go for consistency. The stuff you used to be able to get away with when you were 27 and 37, you definitely can't get away with. And if you get injured, you seem to lose your fitness quicker and it takes longer to get back. So definitely avoid getting ill and getting injured. Which means that you've got to avoid throwing caution to the wind. You've got to avoid pushing yourself to the limit. I'll give you an example. Kipchoge now. Kipchoge does pretty much the same sessions every week with a little variety in his interval stuff. He says he never pushes himself more than 85% unless he's racing. He's very consistent. He doesn't have massive peaks and troughs in his fitness or his training. But email me and send Beth communicate with Beth and give your email address, and we can maybe set up a call or something where I can answer that in more detail. Okay, right. I think we're making some headway here. So, Carl Andrews, I've just been diagnosed with COVID, so I'm self-isolating. I have mild symptoms, cough. Right. So, Carl, COVID is different. It seems to affect the lungs and maybe the heart more, and maybe the immune system more than most other viruses. I think you have to be very careful. There's some. If you message Beth, I'll send you some links to some podcasts with the Whoop. The Whoop is this strap that I wear, but they've done some really good stuff on COVID. They were talking about some research they've done recently with athletes that had returned to training, and 3 months after, these were, I'm not sure if these were, probably recreational athletes, but even though they didn't have bad symptoms, 3 months after, quite a high percentage of them were suffering from myocarditis, which was inflammation of the heart. So you need to be very, very careful. Okay. In terms of long-term effects of COVID on training, it's just not been around long enough for them to do any research. And I would think that most people that have insight into that have, they've been probably tracking data, but they are probably focused more on looking for cures and keeping people healthy at the moment than focusing on the long COVID. But long COVID is definitely a phenomenon, and you definitely don't want to get that post-viral syndrome, because what it could mean is that you are under the pump for months and months and months. So if I were you, I'd be taking it very, very carefully. And if you can, go and get a full checkup and really ease your way back into training when you do. If that means it's going to compromise your race, then personally, I would put long-term health before doing one race. Sorry about that, but you know, this is an insidious disease, and I don't think anybody really knows how bad the long-term symptoms can be in terms of your health. So I'd be very cautious. Yeah, so Debbie Marsden, Debbie, peanut butter helps a lot. Yeah, I like peanut butter, but I'll show you my peanut butter. This is the one I use, Meridian. It's all peanuts. There is no palm oil in there. So when you get it, there's a lot of oil on the top. It's the peanut oil which rises to the top, and they've got a warning on there. In fact, I'll be having some of that peanut butter in just a moment with my yogurt and my berries and my chia seeds and everything. So you definitely, if you the whole earth stuff's okay, but that's got palm oil in, and then some of the more commercial ones are just a lot sweeter. So try and go for the pure peanut ones if you can. You don't have an allergy. So I like peanut butter. Right. So okay, pip and nut. Yeah, somebody else has put that one. Not tried that one. There was another one. There was a Yorkshire one recently that's just come out that I've started using. So let me go. It's 8:15 now, so I don't want to keep you guys much longer. Let me just go and tell you a little bit about programs. We talked about it earlier. So I'm allowed to share these with you because I'm an official Outlaw coach. In fact, I've been an official Outlaw coach since the very beginning of Outlaw. I've been commentating at nearly all of those events since the first one in 2010. So I've been along on this Outlaw journey as long as anybody. I've worked with more Outlaw finishers than anybody else. I've helped more people get to the finish of half and full Outlaws than anyone else. And I think I've probably helped more people get to the finish of 140.6 races than anyone else. Last count was over 1,000 people successfully completed that distance, right from beginners crossing the line just inside 17 hours to people going to Kona. Okay, so I've been there, seen it, done it all. I've done it twice myself. Well, actually, no, I've done it more than twice. I've completed 19 full iron distance races, so I know what it's like as an athlete. But also beware of any coach who puts all his athletic pedigree stuff up there ahead of his coaching experience. I've been teaching for British Triathlon as a coach educator, coach tutor, coach assessor for over 15 years now. So I think I've got a reasonably good pedigree that you can trust when it comes to my race specific plans. So we do these plans. The race specific plans are £100. They include strength and conditioning, pool strength, and we have no pool sessions for the moment as well. We also have a 4-week post-race recovery, which we put in there for you. And there's a bonus offer for those of you who are going to buy a plan now for one of your races. If you don't have one already, you can choose to have either a 20-minute strategy call with myself to talk about your training, or you can choose to have a 20-minute mindset call with Beth about your fears and your biggest obstacles. As I said, Beth's a life coach, and she's actually better equipped to talk about those things than I am. Okay, so that's for those people who are going to purchase. If you want to buy a plan, you'll have entered the Outlaw events through your active account. So you need to log back into there, and then if you click on my events, you'll be able to purchase items. If you're unable to do that, then there's a number there, 01522 69953, and the nice people in the Outlaw office will be able to help you with your purchase. But please don't just ring that because you're lazy. Try and do a bit of manual labor yourself. And then once you purchase, please email your receipt to beth@thetriathloncoach.com, and then we'll get you going with your program. Okay? So that's all from me for this evening. I think I don't think there's any more questions that have come in. I don't think there's anything we haven't answered. So yeah, so I think we're all good. As I said, Richard Rawcliffe, if you want to have a different conversation aside from here about getting older, then just drop your email in or respond to my email when I send out the details of this webinar tomorrow. Okay, all right. That's great. Thank you everybody for being here. It's 8:20, so not quite as long as last time's webinar, but a bit longer than I planned. So I'm getting a bit better with my timekeeping and my time management. Enjoy your evening. Please stay on the lookout for the next webinar, which will be about race-specific conditioning. So the final 6 to 8 weeks, the peaking, the tapering, and also the race day stuff, the strategy, the nutrition. That'll be, well, actually, that'll be in May. In March, we'll be talking about the race-specific stuff, so the 6 weeks leading up to your event. So until then, stay on top of it, stay motivated, don't let things get you down, have a plan, you know, do the simple things, and remember that even if you can't swim and the weather's too shit to go out bike riding, there's still lots of stuff you can do to help you prepare for Outlaw. So get on top of it and get busy, and I'll see you again in March. All the best. Thanks for coming. Bye for now.